Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably been hearing a lot about the stock market lately. Millions of people are beginning to invest for the first time ever. And we're realizing that the financial system should be built to work for us. That's why Robinhood is creating real human education resources, truly digestible financial news, and a platform that lets you invest in your own way, on your own terms. The next generation of investors is already here, and it includes you. Robinhood. Investing is risky. Robinhood Financial, LLC.
911, what's your emergency?
Una camioneta que se cruzan las vías. Y el tren, ay Dios mío.
Señora, ¿me estás diciendo que un tren le pegó a una camioneta?
Sí, yo pensé que alcanzaría a cruzar, ellos iban rápido, creo, y después... Ay Dios mío, qué horror.
No puedes saber a qué velocidad viene un tren. Por eso están los señalamientos de advertencia. Obedécelos. Alto, el tren no para.
Mensaje de Nitsa. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Grammarly Premium. Get a 1-month free trial of Grammarly Premium. Links in the description. Also get a free trial of Amazon Music Unlimited. All you need to do is visit my website to find out more.
Cool.
Welcome to the Stephen Shiels radio show. Got Tim Bruer back on. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, mate.
Good to have you back on the show. What have you been working on for the last week?
Hang on, mate. My emails just popped up and got in the way. Okay. What have I been doing? I'm currently, my focus is getting these pieces that I've written, these love letter pieces that I've written, solo piano pieces, getting them under my fingers so I can go and record them in a little while, hopefully in the next month or two.
Mm-hmm.
I've already recorded some, and I've had a great response on Facebook, and I've already gone and recorded. Yeah, I think I already said that. I've already gone and recorded some, and yeah, I just want to kind of get it out, get a CD out there because I've had such a good response. I'd like to kind of capitalize on that.
Good on you.
And
That's good. You plan to put your work on Spotify or Apple Music, or you go on the CD?
Look, I'm old school because I'm 63, and I am aware of everything. I still buy CDs. I like CDs. There will definitely be a physical CD. I haven't thought about Spotify and so on. I have mixed feelings about Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
I know people that I respect do go on there. Some other people I know kind of boycott it.
Mm-hmm.
The one that there's a label called. I'm sort of jumping the gun a little bit here, but there's a local label called Rufus. It's been around for a long time. A jazz label, sort of a boutique label, and there's a guy in Melbourne, a wonderful pianist called Tim Stevens, who's with that label. And when I've got the product, when I've got the tunes recorded, I thought I might contact the guy that I know that runs that label a little bit to see whether he's interested. But apart from that, a lot of people talk about Bandcamp as being one of the better ones in terms of you getting the full income from the product, and I think you can do some that has kind of a streaming option as well. I'm not sure how that works, but I'm just focused on getting the product first, and then that'll all come after.
Have you thought about doing royalty-free music where you sell it for the one-off fee, and that's it? That's a paycheck for you. Have you looked at that?
No, I don't. Why don't you clarify that for me? It's not something I'm familiar with.
Yeah, so for a movie or a film, your track, you put a price of $1,000 and you sell it to the director, and they got the rights to your music forever. But at least it's a paycheck. A lot of the film composers do that as well, sell it for a one-off price. Have you looked at that route for yourself?
Look, I'm aware of that actually, that stuff. But I suppose it just depends on whether anybody be interested enough to want to pay me $1,000 for it. I think without wanting to be immodest, I think the pieces are really good. But that would, if somebody offered me that, I'd have to then weigh it all up at the time. I do know about that because, being the age that I'm at, I've spoken to a lot of musicians over a long period of time about that whole situation. And my brother, who you probably know, is a saxophone player, lived in London for near on 20 years, and how many still gets, as far as I know, he still gets royalty checks for jingles and recordings and things that he did back in the 80s and more the 90s, because the union is still very, very strong over there. Whereas, I mean, I know enough people here in the industry to know that I'm not. I think it tends to. I think even quite a while ago, I heard the fact that people would write a theme for a TV show and just get a one-off fee, and then from then on they could play it as often they'd like, and the composer wouldn't get any extra money. So I don't know really what that landscape's like these days. I suspect that given things like Spotify, which is personally feel like that it's kind of devalued music. I know there's two sides to that, and I have spoken to some younger musicians that are a little bit positive on Spotify, but the sort of the general landscape for creatives is, from what I can see, I read a reasonable amount about it, is that corporate entities are trying to get the material that creatives put out for next to nothing. So my suspicion would be that the overall landscape for that sort of thing would be to try and get out of it, that for the people in power, they'll be trying to get out of it as little money as possible.
Because the music industry's changed so much. I think in the old days you had to have a record label in order to be successful. Now you can do it independently. But the royalty check I got my first ever royalty. That was $3 I made.
Yeah, I used to back in the 90s when I wrote. Well, I mean, I've written music for a long time, but back in those days, I was playing around the place with a few little bands where I were playing my pieces, and I would always submit whatever it is, the return to APRA, which I'm a member of, and I would get a small check. Once I did do a recording of one of my pieces with a band, and the guy came up and said, I would really like to use that on a TV show. And I think I got $150. This was back in the mid-90s or something, because they played it for a minute or something as background music on the TV show. But yes, and I just haven't bothered with those royalty returns or whatever you call them with APRA, although I probably should, because not that that's been happening much during COVID, but prior to that, I'd be doing a lot of solo piano gigs where I'd play my pieces, but it's just something that the income was so minimal it just didn't really register with me to try and sort of follow that up and create a very tiny income stream, as you've mentioned. Yes. Yeah,
now,
right.
you're recording on CDs. Now, do you have to pay to get your work on a CD and distributed? How does that work? Because Spotify, you got a distributor and you just put an MP3 track. What's it like recording on CDs?
Well, I've only ever put one CD out under my own name, and that was in 2007, 2008. And at that time, I knew a guy who I still know, David Seidel, who was a musician from Adelaide, who had his own label called La Brava. And I knew another friend who had put a CD out with him, and he had, because his late sister Janet Seidel, who's a great jazz singer and pianist, had quite an audience in Japan. My friend sold a lot of CDs to Japan. Anyway, it was a label that I'd heard good things about, that being one of them, and I knew David. So I approached him, and what ended up happening is I paid for all of the recordings, and then I submitted I went and got it mixed and mastered, all under my own, all paid for by myself. And then when David agreed to release it on the La Brava label, I just submitted the final master, and then he took care of all of the costs of producing. I paid the person for the artwork, but he paid for all of the mass producing of the I don't know how many, probably 500 or something. And then I paid him back for that. Obviously, all of that's claimable on tax. Now, obviously, that was 12 or 13 years ago. So things have changed somewhat. I know you can self-release. My brother that I mentioned before, Jason, I was on a CD that he put out called, I was in a band called Hammerhead a few years ago, and he self-released that one. I'm on that. I just got paid for the recording session for that. I don't know how it all worked out for him. He would have copped the costs of that and then recouped them through CDs, just physical CD sales. And he's since put out another one with a revamped version of Hammerhead that I'm not part of, that I know has been self-released, and I think he's done pretty much the same thing. So as I said before, all of that stuff is stuff that I'm yet to explore. I'm just my job is basically to get the product down and get something that I'm happy with, and then all of that's just logistics, really.
No,
but, yeah, go on.
It's always a good achievement when you release a CD or an album. It's a lot of work that goes into it as well.
Of course.
Yeah. How much do you do a lot of rehearsals for your pieces, or do you just improvise for your jazz CDs? What's your process?
Well, it depends on the project. I mean, the CD that I put out on my own name on the La Brava label was a classic jazz quartet CD where I had original pieces, and it followed the standard sort of jazz format in that you play the pieces, and there might be bits within the renderings of the melodies that improvised to varying degrees. As an introduction on one, I only heard a snippet of it yesterday, actually, when I was just culling through some old CDs and trying to work out what to keep and what to throw away, and listen to the beginning of one of these tracks. So there's I mean, the normal thing for a jazz piece in very simple terms is you play the structure of the piece and then you improvise over the chordal structure. So it's mainly based around that. And as I said, some introductions and things would have been improvised. And then, of course, the accompaniment and the way you play within the ensemble is also improvised, except for the melody sections, depending. There can be some improvisation, some playing of set parts. So if I was preparing, when I prepared for that CD, obviously I would have made sure I can play my accompaniment parts to the ensemble sections, and then I remember practicing very much, for a long time on improvising over the chordal structures of those, so that when it came around to the recording, I was comfortable with them and felt confident that I could pull off a good solo. With this current project, these are written pieces. I consciously wanted to write some pieces. I love improvised music; is my favorite thing. That's why I'm a jazz player. But I also love classical music, and I love the idea of being able to write a piece and have it perfect. If you feel like it's perfect, get something and be able to edit it and hone it and spend a long time on the details. That's what I do with the pieces that I've written for my ensemble, but then you improvise on them. Whereas these pieces, I wanted to just have them standalone piano pieces that were fixed in pretty much every detail. There's occasionally just at the beginnings and the ends, if I do some flourishes or things like that, they're a little bit loose. But in general, 99% of them are written. That said, there's one of them that I wrote that felt like, with my background in writing ensemble pieces that are to be improvised upon, there was one that felt like it lent itself to that. So I think I might do a little bit of improvisation on one of them. But by and large, what I'm doing with preparation for that recording is just simply playing the pieces. But I've actually had quite an interesting experience when I went in to record. Excuse me. I've done 2 sessions that have resulted in some of in having some versions of the tracks that I'm happy to release, that I mentioned earlier. But I found that
hike the trail? Check. Order takeout? Check. Schedule heart checkup? Done. We've all adapted to a new way of living. Keep your healthcare on schedule with Johns Hopkins Medicine, where your health and safety are our highest priorities. We're ready to care for you through virtual and in-person visits across Maryland and the greater Washington region. Your health, our experts, safely caring for you. Schedule your care now. Learn more at hopkinsmedicine.org/safe.
The sweet aromas of the apple fritter, cinnamon roll, and blueberry muffin are hard to resist. So making it the rest of the way home without reaching in your McDonald's bag is no easy task. But nothing worth doing is easy.
Wake up and pair any one of these sweet, fluffy, frittery bakery treats with a McCafe iced coffee. Get any size and any flavor for just 99 cents until 11 a.m. Price and participation may vary.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
But even though I was comfortable playing these pieces at home, then when I got into the studio, I ended up getting a little nervous. Probably because the pieces are fixed, and it's the same as playing a classical piece. It's a very different discipline to playing an improvised piece where you know the melody, and you can, depending on the piece, you will probably play the melody in a fairly free and improvised way. Then you improvise over the whole structure, as I've said. Even if it's solo piano, it's still essentially the same idea as I mentioned with the ensemble. So that's what a jazz musician does, and that's what I've been trained to do, and I've been doing for 40 plus years. But when it came time to play these pieces, I found that I would be making mistakes I've never made before in the studio, just because of the pressure. So as I mentioned before, with these love letter pieces, I've been putting up clips of myself playing them on Facebook, and I only posted one last week, and that's the most, not by design, but that ended up being the one that took me the most time to practice, and it was most difficult technically. And so what I found is that I got a similar experience happening when I had just used a little Canon camera that gave me a slightly better quality video than an iPhone, which is what a lot of people use, of course. I went through a similar thing where I would just start making mistakes through the process because I was putting pressure on myself. So I've learned, and I'm very confident that the process of having to prepare those pieces for my Facebook posts will stand me in good stead when I get to the studio, because I've realized, even though I've said it to students many, many times over the years, that when you have a performance like an exam or something that you are going to be, that's going to be like a pressure situation, you kind of have to have done your homework 110 or 120%. So that's kind of what I've learned through this, is that these pieces, if I want to be able to play them up with a bit of pressure, I just have to know them so well that even if I do feel a bit of pressure, I'm able to come up with the goods. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, and I feel like they're sitting well under the fingers by and large. It's just on the heels of what I've just said, I'm just going to keep playing them till I feel like I can go in there and it should be a fairly straightforward process.
What about if you've got to change, you got to play it in a different key? Do you play it all in, do you do it in every key, the same song?
No, I don't quite know why you would ask me that, although there is, these pieces are just written, there they are. It'd be the same as if you were going to record the Bach Well-Tempered Clavier. I don't know why you would take the first prelude in C and go and play it in C sharp or B or something, unless you wanted to do it for an interesting exercise, which would be interesting, because of course pieces sound different in different keys.
I've seen Bach, actually with Bach, has in some clarinet books been transposed in different keys too. Now,
that does happen, yes. Yep, go on.
I was asking you that because a jazz player, you've got to sometimes play in a different key.
This is true, and I do have a partial answer to you, which is, it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
As I said, for these set love letter pieces, that simply won't be the case because there'll be no point in it. But the reality is that when you're playing jazz standards, which is the meat and potatoes of most jazz players' practice, and I don't mean practice at home, I mean their performance practice outside when they're performing, is that you will get asked to play well-known standards in many different keys, because of course you often end up working with singers that want them in different keys. That was something in the past I used to struggle with a little bit, but the more experienced I've got and the more singers I've worked with and situations I've been in, I've become much better at being able to transpose them in my head. Sometimes I cop out and grab the iReal app that's so prevalent these days and change the key. But I do try and challenge myself to commit them to memory, even if I do that, even on the performance. If I might just want to put it there just to be safe and rather safe than sorry, try and get through one or two choruses, which is a cycle of the piece, and try and get my eyes away from the chords. But so I'm much better at transposing, and that is true that you do have to play these standards in lots of different keys. So I can kind of see the angle you're coming from, but it's actually quite interesting to me in that I've had a much longer recording project underway, and that's the project that I decided to embark upon after the CD that I recorded or I released in 2007-8 that I said earlier. And I thought, I really want to do a solo piano album along, a standard jazz piano solo piano CD. So I began working on it. I worked on arrangements, and here I am 13 years later, still working on them, which sounds probably pretty ridiculous, but I was particularly fussy about making sure that I had a really good left hand, because though for some people solo jazz piano might just sound like, oh yeah, if you're jazz pianist and that's something you would do, but it's actually a really pretty challenging thing to do. And anybody that talks about it, that knows about it, says that. And the other thing is that if you've come along the path that I have and you've listened to the greats that do that, namely Keith Jarrett and Brad Meldau and Fred Hirsch and Bill Evans, even though Bill Evans himself claimed he didn't think he was that great a solo jazz pianist. He's a very beautiful solo jazz pianist, even though perhaps not quite as comprehensively across the idiom as those other people I mentioned. But anyway, what I'm saying is that, and I'll get to the thing about the keys in a minute because it's quite fascinating. The standard that I was aiming for was, of course, the highest possible standard, because that's all I've ever been into music for, is just to be as good as I can be. And as the years ticked by and I continued working on these pieces, I did go into the studio probably maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe it wasn't that long, 6 years ago or something. And I put them all down, but I just wasn't happy enough with them, just given the standard that I've talked about that I'm trying to achieve. But I felt that it was a good thing to do. I learned a lot, and I thought, these arrangements and the whole concept I had was great. I just need to keep chugging along. So here we are. X amount of years later, I feel like I'm getting much, much closer now. But my point was that at one point my mentor, Mike Knock, said, oh, do you play them in different keys? Because, he's been chipping away at me the whole time. Why haven't you put your CD out, man? And I've been going, oh, it's just, man, I'm just not happy with it. It's just got to be right, and have you tried playing them in different keys? Oh, okay. And one of the things that you can imagine if you're an improviser and you're playing the same song in the same key over and over and over and over and over again, as I have with a number of these pieces to get them to a level that I'm happy with, is you get stuck. You can get stale. So I've actually written a little blog about this that I might put out. But it's been a very interesting, though arduous process doing this. But at some point I decided, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I started putting them in different keys, and that has been just so good. So one of the main pieces I've been working on, I can play it in 5, 6, 7 keys. And another one of the pieces I've been working on, I can play that in 3 or 4. But so that was going on, and it's been really given these pieces, it's given me a new lease of life on these pieces, in the sense that I can play them in other keys and still use that practice to develop the skills that I'm trying to develop on the piece in the original key, enable me to continue to get that raised a level without getting stale. And it cross-pollinates. It's great. You find yourself, if you play and I'm talking about the improvisation. I'm not working on the arrangement, but on the improvisation, because you're in a different key, it sounds different, it feels different on the instrument. So you come up with, you play different ideas and different patterns and things, and then you come back to your original key, and it's like that. It fertilizes or nourishes or nurtures that. So it's been great. And the other thing that has pushed me along that path has been watching a wonderful jazz pianist called Dan Tepfer, Tepfer, who's a great New York jazz pianist who's been doing a lot of weekly live streams throughout the whole of COVID. And I'd known of him because he's recorded the Goldberg Variations by Bach and improvised on them, so I was aware of him. But somehow I come across one of his live streams and just really took a shine to his style. And one of the things he did in one of the earlier live streams is to play the well-known, it's actually not written by Miles Davis, it's attributed to Miles Davis, called Solar. It's actually written by the guitar player. What's his name? It's gone out of my head for the moment now. It'll probably come to me. But anyway, a well-known jazz song called Solar, and he just said, okay, here we go, I'm going to play Solar in all 12 keys. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And he did it. And then that sort of lodged in my mind. Chuck Wayne was a guitar player. And it's like some of these pieces that were attributed to particular jazz musicians, it's becoming more widespread to actually acknowledge the original composer. Anyway, and then he, in subsequent live streams, he would say to the audience, okay, I got any requests? And they'd say, oh, do this song. And he'd go, okay, what key, what time signature? And I mean, this really was inspiring to me. So he ended up playing Someone to Watch Over Me, the Gershwin song, in B major, which is like pretty unusual. And I just watched him do it, and he just said, B major, okay, and he started off and just went into it. He played it beautifully, and I'm going, man, this is amazing. And so these are Facebook streams, but they go to YouTube after they've been on Facebook, and that's how I access them, because I've been doing a lot of YouTubing during COVID, just as a way of fertilizing and my creative juices, if you like, and just checking out what's going on. And it's been nice apart from that, and I'm not going to get sidetracked onto what I was about to say, and that is that I got in touch with him, but that him and others have sort of talked whilst they've been doing these things, and it's been a really nice little community feel across the globe to have gone through COVID and hear the thoughts of jazz musicians, or other people, of course, but talking about it in various ways, just the year that we had last year. But anyway, I ended up just putting comments, because I'm one of those people, if I see something that I like or I hear something that I like, I love to let the person know that I loved it, or I enjoyed it, or I appreciate it. So I started putting comments, and he got back to me, and we had a couple of little Facebook exchanges, and he just said, look, once you've done it sounds ridiculous, but once you've done about 100 jazz standards in all 12 keys, it just sort of becomes so incredibly easy. But this is obviously a very long answer to your question, but it's a good one. And it's been something that I'm really grateful for in terms of COVID, that I found Dan Tepfer and found this inspiration to play in a lot of keys. So I did do the solo in 12 keys. I haven't sort of kept it up, but I still play, even have already today, played parts of one of these pieces that I've been working on for so long in a whole lot of different keys. So it's become part of my practice. So it's a really good thing to do. And just to finish off on that is really when you've been playing jazz for a long time, there's only sort of maybe 3 keys really that you don't get to play in very often. That would be probably B, C sharp and F sharp, or D flat and G flat, even though the C sharp and F sharp or the D flat and G flat do factor actually quite heavily in jazz standards. But they're the ones, particularly in the minor keys. Maybe if I said not B minor, but C sharp minor and F sharp minor and maybe G sharp minor. Some of these, there's just a few keys that are the ones that you tend not to get to play in, particularly in a tonic key very often, that are the ones where you just go, oh, when you come across a song that might modulate to those particular keys, oh, here we go, here's those chords again that I don't feel as quite as comfortable with as I do with, A minor or any of the more obvious keys. So all I'm getting at is that, once you've confronted these, and I don't feel like I've confronted them as much as I'd like, but I'm certainly better than I was. It's like, well, that's it. There's no other keys to confront. So it's actually, as I said, at the age of 63 for me, it's been a really good process, and I'm certainly going to continue down that path. So there's a pretty long answer to your question.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to talk about, how did you cope, being a musician in the 2020 coronavirus pandemic? You went on the JobKeeper. How's that been going for you financially as a musician, and how did you cope with the lockdown as well and the isolation?
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate that I have a wife that works, and our children have left home. And when COVID first hit and the gigs just stopped, like they stopped within a week. Everybody I know, pretty much they just stopped within about a week or two. So gigs just dried up constantly, completely rather. I still was working at AIM, and we went online, and I still had some private students that I took online. So I had some income, but the gig income, which is less than 50% for me, but still substantial, just dried up. But fortunately, my wife was working, and we've been very sensible with our finances, so we didn't have massive overheads. But she was fortunate in that she was able to apply for JobKeeper. At that time, I wasn't sure about whether I qualified as a sole trader or whatever it was. And to be honest, I'm one of those people that I'd rather not take a handout if I could avoid it. So I didn't just jump on the bandwagon and try and get that happening. Not that I'm putting down anybody that did at all, but I just felt like I don't really feel like I need it. I'd rather somebody more needy had it. But then my wife had even though I said she works, and I'm fortunate that we have a shared income, but that she does. She's a celebrant, wedding and funeral celebrant, and that did die. Pardon the no pun intended there. That dropped right off because, of course, the sizes of the crowds you're allowed to have at those events were reduced to completely impractical proportions. So anyway, so there was a little period there we weren't earning as much as we might like, but we were doing okay. And then she ended up getting JobKeeper. At that time, as I said, I wasn't sure whether I qualified, but AIM put out an email to say, we're going to apply for it. Would you like us to apply on your behalf? So I said yes. And then eventually, even though initially universities were not qualified for it, they ended up somehow, AIM ended up being qualified for it, or qualified. And I did get JobKeeper for a number of months, but then that fell away. But my wife was still getting it till recently. She then picked up a whole lot more work, and gigs have been trickling in. So we got through it okay. And on the broader subject of how did I deal with the lockdown, for quite a while I really didn't mind too much, even though, of course, it was a drag that this was happening, and that there were people getting ill and, of course, occasionally dying, particularly overseas. Of course, it's been absolutely horrendous. But in general, because musicians, as you would know, we're pretty solitary individuals, we practice on our instruments a lot, it really was a very natural fit for me. It was only, I did do I think the last gig I did was in March, and then I got offered a live stream on the strength of my Facebook videos in May. I did that, then I got offered a one-off gig in about July. But in general, for that period between whatever it was, March and September or October, when a few gigs started rolling in, it was virtually, there were virtually no gigs. But I was reasonably happy, and I also ceased getting together and playing with people. There's a couple of good friends of mine that come around. We would play music together, and because of the whole social distancing thing, I just felt like it wasn't the right thing to do. But at some point along the way, I felt like it was all right to do that as long as we were careful.
Mm-hmm.
So I started playing again with my good friend Paul Mitchell-Brown and Steve Elphick. One's a guitar player and the other's a bass player, and they both live close by, so they just come around. We just play in the lounge room.
Have you
yeah,
gone
yes.
back to Adelaide, or you in Sydney still?
No, I'm in Sydney. What do you mean by going back to Adelaide?
Because did you go back to Adelaide at one stage before New Year's Eve, and then come back to Sydney, and then
No, I did Melbourne. I might have told you about Melbourne.
Oh, Melbourne.
Yeah, I come from Adelaide originally,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't been down there during the COVID period. Unfortunately, my mother passed away getting on 2 years ago now, and I did have to go down there many times over the course of the period of time following her death, and to deal with family things and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we had a big drought from going to Melbourne, where my daughter and my two grandchildren live.
Mm-hmm.
My wife used to go very, very regularly. I would go less regularly, but still regularly. I think my wife had been in June. I hadn't been since February, although they came up here, I think, at the tail, maybe in February as well.
Mm.
And then we got down. I lose track, Stephen, but I think it was it must have been December. It's November or December. We got down for 4 days, and we had a holiday planned for Phillip Island for New Year's, but then the Northern Beaches cluster kicked in here, and suddenly the borders got closed again. So we broke our drought and had 4 days down there in Melbourne and caught up with them all, which was wonderful, of course. But we're now just sort of back to the closed border situation.
Did you?
I'm going.
Did you have to isolate for 2 weeks when you came back to Sydney?
No. There was a period where you could get down and come back without having to do any of that stuff. So no, we haven't done any isolation. We've just been, given that the general advice has been that if you're a little older, you might run the risk of having a more severe reaction to COVID, even though I'm not in the 70 age group, obviously. But having said that, there's been many people of much younger ages that have had a terrible time with it. So all I'm getting at is that even having said that, due to our ages, we've been pretty cautious. I suppose that we're just fairly straight ahead people, and we just figured, seen enough evidence to think, no, I really don't want to go there. Even though obviously, an obvious example would be Peter Dutton got it or Trump got it, and they're okay. I met somebody on the weekend that had it. They were still suffering a couple of minor repercussions afterwards, but they seem to be doing okay. But last thing, we really wanted to do that. So we've been very cautious and kept to ourselves a bit like a lot of people. But as I said, I wouldn't probably have as many of these love letter pieces or have the sort of small little appreciation or fan base for my solo piano music if it wasn't for COVID. Probably. I mean, I imagine I would have probably done it, but probably would have proceeded in a different way. So that's been a nice thing. And as I mentioned before, there's a lovely pianist called Tim Stevens in Melbourne who he posted every day for like 100 days or something. So there was him, and there's also the well-known Paul Grabowski, who I've known for many years fairly casually, but he posted stuff and like a regular Friday. And I was very chuffed not only to get very positive comments from both those two guys who I admire greatly, and have particularly been a fan of Paul Grabowski for a very, very long time. But I was also sort of, when I chimed in on various posts, was sort of thanked by Paul for being part of the people that sort of put out some nice music that had a positive effect during the pandemic, or the sort of intense time of the pandemic. So, there's been a lot of good that's come of it. And of course, it probably goes without saying, but there was a period there where a lot of the flights weren't happening. And where we live in Ashfield, it was very noticeable. Not only the sound of the planes and the sound of the cars dropped away, but the skies were so clear. I put up a Facebook post one day saying, has anybody noticed how clear the skies are? So there's been, and I've always been an environmentalist, very much conscious of the environment. So and I know I'm not unique in that respect, and I'm not unique in pointing out that it's been a very interesting period of time for the planet to see what happens when suddenly people stop doing everything they were doing, because a lot of what people were doing is not good for the planet. So it's been an interesting time. Of course, it's been absolutely terrible for countries like the US and the UK and Brazil, and I'm not going to embarrass myself and show my lack of awareness of wherever else it's been bad, but you know what I'm saying. And we've done it, even though I know it's regrettable that people have died here. Comparatively, we've done pretty well.
Yeah, Italy was hit the worst.
Right, yes.
At the start of the pandemic.
That's right, yeah, that's right. It's been a very interesting time for human beings.
Then Melbourne went into a second full lockdown.
That's correct, of course.
And now we've got restrictions where in Sydney you have to wear a mask in the shopping centre.
That's correct. Yeah, I've been doing that. Yeah, you have to do that. We actually, interestingly, whilst we're on this subject, we went down to Kiama over the weekend, took 4 days off because we had to cancel our other holiday to Victoria. And they've got a whole different thing going on down there. Once you get out of the metropolitan area, you don't have to wear a mask. So there's probably only about a 5% take up of masks down there, which we were quite, the first day we're going, what's going on? Nobody's wearing a mask. And then the wife asked the shopkeeper. We found out. But yeah, no, I just think, it's, as I said earlier, it's just not worth the risk. And we want to do the right thing by the society. So yeah, interesting times.
When AIM went online, how did you find teaching lectures online instead of in the classroom? Did you enjoy it more, or did you find it was a bit weird at first?
I'm trying to get the chronology of this right. We do trimesters at AIM, as you well know, and that was about halfway through trimester 1 that we had to go online. So what happened was, the subjects I usually teach are piano, contemporary piano. I was doing things like keyboard skills for many years, but I think in that first trimester, I had some piano students. I had an ensemble. It's so long ago, it's nearly a year ago. I'm trying to remember what other subjects I was doing. But anyway, I finished what we had to do with the ensemble, which is obviously problematic because we had to turn that into a recording project. So students had to record their own parts and upload them. Fortunately, in each one of those classes, I had a student who was au fait enough with recording technology in terms of platforms such as Logic and Ableton, and there's one called Band Lab, which was the recommended one. So the ensemble situation morphed from a traditional, we're all in a room together, I'm rehearsing everybody, stopping and starting or doing whatever and advising, practicing sections, whatever, to suddenly a class once a week online where we would choose songs and discuss the songs, and then the kids would submit would record their parts and then upload them, and then I would give them feedback and all of that. That was probably out of the, if I zoom forward to trimester 2 and 3, I kept the ensemble classes. I had piano students, and then I picked up a oral training class. The ensembles right throughout worked okay, but not ideal, not ideal. But it was. I think the kids got enough out of it, and of course, one of the positive things was that a lot of kids got recording experience that they otherwise wouldn't have had. So that was a positive. The piano side of things, and I also moved, as I said earlier, all my private home students online. Was surprisingly okay once I found a platform that worked. And before we were pushed into using Teams exclusively, which we were, I think I found FaceTime actually worked the best for me. I tried Zoom, I tried Messenger by Facebook, FaceTime, obviously. There might have been WhatsApp I tried once. I found FaceTime because everybody has it mainly, that worked okay. And then I just moved on to Teams, which is okay as well, Microsoft Teams. So the piano lessons weren't bad. And as I said, I did my private people that have come back now. And I mean, the only thing that happens is occasionally you get some, it just might freeze for a minute or whatever, but you can't really play simultaneously, but that doesn't ever tend to be a problem too much. The oral training class worked quite well. The only difficulty was doing assessments and the final exam. I mean, the transcript, there's two assessments. One was a transcription assessment, and that's pretty straightforward. They just submitted the transcription, so that didn't really change much. But the oral exam, which would normally be done with me sitting at a keyboard in front of a class and playing intervals and chords and things like that, that had to be changed to me doing an audio file, sending them in a PDF of the exam, and then having to complete it in a given time. But we've done a couple of those now, and they're not bad now. The Teams thing is pretty good for that. It worked okay. Yeah.
You going back to AIM this year to teach online, or is it still not on campus, or is it still going to be online for the first trimester?
That's a question that we all have, and I actually bumped into a couple of my colleagues on the weekend, and we were all discussing that. But there's where are we? Wednesday. Tomorrow there's a big staff meeting in there. I'm actually going to go in there face to face for the first time since March. So that's probably my number one question. Prior to the Northern Beaches cluster, it looked like we were. The only email I've had that references this situation had a positive tone about it, seemed to suggest that we may well be moving back to face for most classes. I think they're going to keep a few online because some things have
Whether you're having a not moving off the couch while you watch the game kind of day, or a no time between conference calls kind of day, it can still be a delicious Dunkin' kind of day. And with Dunkin' now available on DoorDash, it's easier than ever to get your faves brought right to your door. So if you're looking for coffees, donuts, and breakfast sandwiches in the morning, craving some afternoon snack and bacon, or in need of Dunkin' refreshers for a PM pick-me-up, we've got you covered. Order now and get your faves brought to your door through Grubhub, Uber Eats, and DoorDash. Price and participation may vary. Exclusions apply. America runs on Dunkin'.
Hike the trail? Check. Order takeout? Check. Schedule heart checkup? Done. We've all adapted to a new way of living. Keep your healthcare on schedule with Johns Hopkins Medicine, where your health and safety are our highest priorities. We're ready to care for you through virtual and in-person visits across Maryland and the greater Washington region. Your health, our experts, safely caring for you. Schedule your care now. Learn more at hopkinsmedicine.org/safe.
They actually have advantages in being online, but I suspect we are, but that's going to be clarified tomorrow.
No, hopefully things get back to normal.
Oh, of course. I mean, and obviously, as anybody that's been keeping up with the situation, as I'm sure most people are, it seems to me to be an ongoing process where people are working stuff out as they go along. I mean, if you recall right at the very beginning of the pandemic, even Anthony Fauci, the American guy, was questioning the effectiveness of masks. And within a very short space of time, he said, you should be wearing masks. But that's just an example of the way that people have been trying to work this out. So I still see the way it is at the moment as being a bit like that, even though obviously we're a lot further down the track, and we have vaccine rollouts happening same time. So it's, the thing is moving, it's progressing. The contact I can only really speak to Australia, of course, but the contact tracing thing is well established. Like all of the places we went to in Kaimur, even though the masks weren't mandatory, they would ask you straight away to sign in before you even did anything. So there's structures in place that are enabling us to deal with this whilst allowing society to continue to function. And of course, we've got the vaccines coming up the rear, if you like. And I think they're looking at rolling those out late Feb, March here. So, I mean, you know what I'm saying? If you look at it a year ago, it had hardly happened. Now we're here, hopefully within a year's time, which is, it's a long time, but realistically, we will have moved through the thing, one would hope. I certainly don't feel like getting a vaccination straight away, but I'll certainly will when it feels appropriate. But yeah, let's hope.
I was going to mention about that because 100 years ago, there was the Spanish flu in Australia.
Correct, yeah. Yep.
There was no vaccine for that as well.
Right.
I think people just built immunity to it. I wouldn't take a fresh batch of vaccine straight away.
No, that's exactly how I feel. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and we all had inoculations, and we inoculated our children.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's been one of the problems with this is that a lot of younger generation, I'm not being down on them, but they don't realise the sort of relative luxury that we've had for a long time of certain illnesses being eradicated through vaccines. Like when I went to school, we would see kids with calipers on their legs from polio.
Wow.
I mean, that's not something that somebody of your age would ever have seen. So that's, battling the people that want their freedoms and are complaining that they're being locked down, which is of course difficult, but comparatively had a pretty good run in terms of, diseases, even though in some countries, obviously some of those diseases that we've eradicated in Western countries still are happening. But yeah, no, just my instinct is that, I mean, most in all of the information I've seen that's come my way about vaccines, they tend to usually take, 3 to 4 years to develop. And we're talking about having something developed within 10 or 11 months. I'm not a big fan of the idea of putting that in my body at this stage. But as you're probably aware, there was discussions on the weekend about perhaps making it mandatory for you to enter certain venues and things, like having to have a vaccination before you could get in. So if it becomes like that, we'll have to rethink, how we feel about taking vaccines.
It's a bit weird, to be honest with you. That's
look, I mean, everybody's had got a personal. I'm just one of those people. I don't like to take a tablet for anything. If I've got a headache, I certainly don't suddenly pop a Panadol. I'm not a big fan of introducing anything to my body, unless I really, really have to. And I mean, yeah.
You lived in a time where there was the Asian flu, wasn't it? Did you live through?
Look, to be honest, I don't remember much about that. I mean, I thought you were going to say AIDS, and I do remember AIDS quite clearly in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
There was the SARS, SARS one, which was, God, I don't know, what was that, 15 or 16 years ago or something.
Was that the pandemic at the time?
SARS or HIV?
Yes.
No, it's not I'm not a medical person at all. Pandemic, I think, is something that really can affect anybody in the population, I would suspect. Whereas HIV, when it first happened, was more related to the gay community. Obviously, heterosexual people could get it, of course, but it was a bit more confined to that community. I don't know much about it other than that it was devastating. And I was only recounting to my wife recently, seeing, images of like Rudolf Nureyev, the famous dancer, before he died, and he got AIDS, and he looked just so awful, really tragic. In fact, a jazz pianist I mentioned earlier, as being one of my favorites, Fred Hirsch, was one of the first jazz musicians to come out as gay, and I can't quite think when that was. That would have been maybe the mid '80s or something. He was HIV positive, and I've read his autobiography in the last year or so, and he was just talking about how horrendous it was seeing so many of his friends and colleagues just die. So that was terrible, and there was a very famous commercial on the TV at that time which showed a bed full of syringes with the needles pointing up, and somebody laying out a sheet on the top so that when the sheet finally sort of settled, you could see all these pointy syringes, and it was basically saying that if you're going to have sexual relations with anybody, you could well be, the potential for many needles to have been shared was great, very great. So, that was a pretty dramatic ad to run on the TV, and there are other ones. I think there were Grim Reapers and things. It was, really tragic situation at the time. But of course, now it's not life-threatening now. And Fred Hirsch is still 65 now, and has lived he's had some health issues, but he's living a good, productive life, still active. And so, that's not what it was. But I don't think that was ever a pandemic.
Because Freddie Mercury from Queen died of HIV.
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
Very
correct.
talented singer, in my opinion.
That's correct. Yes. There would be others. I think Rock Hudson, the actor, who of course, was such a sort of a male sex symbol. Nobody knew he was gay, I think, till the end, and he died of that, as far as I know. I think that's correct.
Yeah, Tim, it was a fantastic show with you today.
Pleasure, mate. It's lovely chatting.
Where can people find you on social media or contact you?
As I said on the last one, just pretty much Facebook. I'm pretty old school with all of that. As I think I also said, once I have this new recording out, I'm going to get my own website and put up some stuff. I'm looking forward to that, actually. But at this stage, just Facebook. I think even my mobile number's there somewhere. Certainly, they can contact me via private message or through Facebook.
Sweet.
As is obvious, there's quite a few clips of me playing my pieces on there, and lots of other things I love putting up. You'll see there's quite a bit of political stuff, and I lean to the left. But there's also a lot of, when I see a great piece of music or a great performance, I put that up there. So there's quite a lot of stuff up there that might be of interest to other musicians. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast with Tim Bruer. Don't forget to get your 1 month free trial of Grammarly Premium and free trial of Amazon Music Unlimited. You can visit my website, the Grammarly Premium. The links are in the description. Subscribe to the podcast, turn on your notifications, leave a review. Also, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. Turn on those notifications, and see you later. What I'll do now is I'll play a song that I composed in 2020. It's called Pandemic. Check it out. It is off my album. I'm just going to let you know right now. It's on Spotify. Let's get it. When you're trying to find your song that you wrote and you can't remember the album. It's off the album The Plague. It's the second track, so I hope you enjoy.
At Facebook, we continue to take critical steps to better secure our platforms, including more than tripling safety and security teams to 35,000 people and partnering with security researchers, other tech companies, and law enforcement. What's next? We support updating internet regulations to address today's challenges and hold companies, including Facebook, accountable for preventing election interference, protecting people's privacy, and enabling safe and easy data portability between platforms. Learn more at about.fb.com/regulations.
Hike the trail? Check. Order takeout? Check. Schedule heart checkup? Done. We've all adapted to a new way of living. Keep your healthcare on schedule with Johns Hopkins Medicine, where your health and safety are our highest priorities. We're ready to care for you through virtual and in-person visits across Maryland and the greater Washington region. Your health, our experts, safely caring for you. Schedule your care now. Learn more at hopkinsmedicine.org/safe.